All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Talking Trout. It is 2023. We are still here on Zoom doing these presentations for you. I hope you're getting a lot out of it. I know I certainly enjoy bringing on the different guests and hearing going through the different topics and hearing their perspectives on things. That being said, we're really excited for our guest tonight, Sara Strassman. She's the new program manager for the TU DARE, which is the Driftless Area Restoration effort. Sara came on board last summer, was hired by TU. Formerly, that was Jeff Hastings that held that position for a number of years. Jeff has retired and sailed off into the sunset. I'm sure he's still around, but we're really glad to have Sara on board. She's got a great history. She spent about 10 years working for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources on Mississippi River issues. And before that, she worked on stream restoration and dam removal projects for the nonprofit organization American Rivers. So with that, I am going to turn the stage over to you, Sara, and say welcome to Talking Trout.
Great. Thanks, and let me know if the audio kicks out or anything. Otherwise, I'm going to assume it's all good. So yeah, thanks for inviting me to speak about our beautiful Driftless area. I am going to shut off myself so I can manage my screens here a little minute. Let's see. Here we go. So I have just a little overview. I figured we would talk about just sort of five topic areas today. Our program structure and staff for the Driftless area restoration effort, a little bit of historical context, our current and future stressors in the Driftless area, some of our priority work, and some strategies moving forward. So I am going to try to cover a fair bit of content, and I did try to cut it down so we have some time for questions at the end too. So I'll take questions at the finish if you are able to hold on to them or put them in the chat. Oh, here we go. All right, so the Driftless program, I think as Mike alluded to, IDEA was launched back in 2004 from what I have gathered from the inimitable Du Welter. And the first staff person was Jeff Hastings, hired back in 2006. And so he has been holding the reins of the program from then until last July when he handed them over to me. So it has been a small show from the get-go, but consistent in staffing. So right now, I'm the Driftless Area Program Manager. We also have on staff Paul Cron. Many of you may know Paul. He's our stream restoration specialist, and like Jeff, also came from a background at the county doing a lot of NRCS related land conservation work, and is a real wealth of knowledge in our area. So the program's in its 17th year now that we're in 2023. So, it's driving a car. It's almost a mature being. And I think really the most important aspect that I've gleaned from my short time here about DARE is just really that it is a partnership program. Since its beginning, it's been a collaboration among chapters and state agencies and other sporting and conservation organizations, as well as foundations and even some business partners. So it's going to continue in that capacity. And we've had a whole host of partners, probably, too many here to mention, but I did want to point out one of our biggest collaborators has been Minnesota Trout Unlimited, which works alongside myself and Jeff before me, and Paul Cron to head the state-funded stream restoration program that operates on the Minnesota side. So I guess just a little, again, overview of the Driftless area, since I'm assuming most folks on this call have had some exposure, but you never know who might be viewing this in posterity. So The Driftless area has a really unique geology that supports just thousands of miles of cold water streams. And so we are also the wild western populations of eastern brook trout, along with wild reproducing brown trout and a host of native species that are endemic to this region, as well as rare ecological communities that are across this 4-state, roughly 24,000 square mile area. And so I've got just a graphic here with the counties, as I think that's helpful for folks to envision. And we do have a very broad definition of driftless here in the Driftless program. This isn't just the textbook version. I think we probably have a little broader boundaries than anyone else might use. So, and again, just for a little bit of historical context, the Driftless area has had a lot of historical impacts, and they are still impacting the landscape today. So there was really rapid and pretty extensive land clearing undertaken for agriculture and early settlement around 100 and 150 years ago. And those practices were relatively incompatible with the soils and the slopes and the climate of the region, and it triggered very extensive erosion that we still see the impacts of today. There were also ditching and straightening, plowing over wetlands and clearing of forests and plowing up slopes that were actually common practices into the early part of last century as well. And really, erosion was occurring across the entire country at that time, but the Driftless was an area with really profound and kind of severe scars. So when federal attention and resources were being directed to erosion problems, the Driftless area was the center, really, of research and innovation for new practices that were arresting erosion, stabilizing landscapes, modifying agricultural practices, and managing water resources to protect their integrity. So what we see today in our watersheds are scars of those past practices. The groundwater fed streams in this region don't really have the stream power under their normal conditions to move this type of a sediment load that was rapidly delivered to the stream systems in order to reclaim their floodplains and to clear the stream beds and shape the banks. And so that, paired with the loss of wetlands and forests that were occurring, that was leading to an increase in runoff, was occurring on top of entrenched channels and has created really steep bank conditions that continue to load sediments and their associated nutrients to streams, while those streams are still actively working to reclaim their floodplains. So the picture on the left here is showing a project site where this is a high one, but we do see raw open banks like this across the entire Driftless area that are continuing to load sediment to the stream systems. And then this cartoon graphic on the right is really kind of just a schematic of the anthropogenic soils that were deposited associated with that earlier land clearing. There would have been a variety of riparian conditions in the pre-settlement era, but the cartoon is meant to kind of offer a depiction of some of the land uses that we have seen that have arisen post-settlement, and give a perspective on the conditions of wetlands and floodplains in much of the Driftless. So we do see commonly in these post-settlement areas, croplands and riparian lands, or I should say croplands and pasture lands, and then more of a pioneering riparian community that establishes. So looking a little bit at some of our current and future stressors for the Driftless area, I wanted to focus just kind of on three major stressors here, but there are a lot of interrelated issues that touch our work that we are mindful of as we're developing conservation strategies and program work. So the first one I'm bringing here is climate change. I have a series of graphics from UW-Madison Center for Climate Research and the Wisconsin Initiative for Climate Change Impacts that is known as WICI. And this graphic is showing increases in days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Obviously, there are a lot of potential concerns for those of us in cold water conservation with increasing high temperatures. But one in-stream effect that concerns us is increased algal production and in some waters, harmful algal blooms. We also see temperature increases that are nighttime highs. So the warmer summer nights phenomenon. So these are minimum temperatures that stay above 70 degrees during the summertime. And that's, you know, maybe great for like drive-in movies or late night stargazing, but is potentially impactful to trout due to the sustained higher temperature impacts to bioregulation mechanisms in trout and growth rates. I've brought in here, hopefully it's going to come up here, a graphic from a 2017 paper that was looking at thermal limits to growth and physiological stresses of brook trout under several different temperature regimes. And obviously the point here just being one indication of many papers that are out there identifying that as temperatures increase, both length and mass development rates decline for brook trout. And again, if we're going to have temperatures that are sustaining in more of these higher classes, it's of significant concern for sublethal effects for trout populations. So this graphic is looking at the potential for warmer winters that are forecasted. So nighttime temperatures above 32, which we're having right now, frustratingly, for those of us who enjoy winter. So this has, you know, the potential to increase discharge in winter, which can, in this region of the country, used to have a somewhat lower discharge rate. It's a loss of snowpack, and it's also, you know, potential changes in stream temperature regimes during the period of egg development for trout. So another kind of concern on the horizon. And then this graphic is showing increases in 4-inch rainfall events. And so this is, again, all of these graphics were relative to the last, essentially from 1950 through present, or, you know, much of our lifetime through present, as compared to the RCP 4.5 greenhouse gas emission scenario, which is one that assumes that we're going to be taking actions to mitigate emissions so that ultimately they end up capped at about 35% of their 2005 levels. And it's taking those models for temperature and CO2 concentrations out through the next century, and then giving us the mid-century averages for the likelihood of these different environmental variables. So if you could follow all of that, essentially this graphic is one that concerns me, and they've done these for many rainfall depths, but, you know, this is showing an increase of, you know, essentially doubling the days of potential for 4 inches or greater of rainfall from, you know, 8 days for most of the driftless historically to in the range of 10 to 16 days per century, which is, you know, doubling the occurrence of this type of a storm, which isn't even the maximum storm, but it is a storm that, you know, frequently would overwhelm a community's water treatment and infrastructure carrying capacity. So one that has potential water quality impacts. Oop. That's in the wrong spot. Okay, sorry for the random camper. This event is also forecast to be more likely. These very high intensity, heavy rainfall events. You know, this one is, I think, photos that folks are very familiar with. I believe taken again by Duke, but showing the impacts of a 15+ inch rainfall event in the Driftless area. And you know, these types of events have the magnitude and force to be able to, you know, really modify floodplains and cause extensive damage to infrastructure in the watersheds. So this is a lot of stream power to process through systems that are, you know, generally have less floodplain and wetland capacity than they historically would have had, and are still dealing with a lot of entrenchment from those past sediments. Another Driftless area stressor that we are mindful of as we're planning our work are water quality conditions. So the common stressors are tied to a lot of the agricultural practices. That is the dominant, you know, land use for the Driftless. So not too surprising, but you know, we see impairments related to nutrients and phosphorus, agricultural impacts, and then sediment sources, which can be both bank erosion and runoff from farm practices. We do also see bacteria levels that are higher, typically associated with either animal access to streams or failing septic systems. And then we see the impacts of sedimentation, both, you know, these bedded sediments that are still processing through the systems, as well as higher turbidities that occur from more active loading. So I did just a quick grab for a part of the Driftless area in Wisconsin. This is like cutting across Buffalo, Trempealeau, and Jackson counties. And here we have the impaired streams shown with the trout streams. And so if I click this again, it should, as you're watching, show where impaired streams co-occur with trout streams. They will change to red, hopefully. The point being, some of these places where we still have the thermal regime to support cold water resources, and where we do actually have good remnant brook trout populations in some of these sub-watersheds, we also do have water quality impairments. So these are places where there is opportunity for real ecological uplift if we can address some of the impairments. And a lot of these watersheds, the common impairments are phosphorus. Also, some have macroinvertebrate community deficiencies. I was also surprised to see quite a few chloride exceedances in these watersheds, and that's something that's we'll get here to in a second, but actually we'll get to it right now. So chloride inputs, this has been a trend that has been increasingly problematic over the last 20 years, in particular, with salt application rates rising almost exponentially, has caused a lot of salinization of freshwater systems. And this is one of the water quality arenas that is not reversible. So, you know, unlike the gains we've seen related to the Clean Water Act in controlling point sources and overall concentrations becoming trending downward for things like mercury and PCBs and other regulated heavy metals over the last 30+ years of Clean Water Act regulation. Chloride is one that's been trending in the opposite direction pretty substantially. It has been picked up now by most of the 4 Driftless area states for certain. Most of the north central part of the country has been increasingly monitoring for chloride and sodium as well. But chloride inputs are primarily coming from winter road salt applications and excessive salting at private institutions or by private operators. But secondary sources are also water softening systems and fertilizers. Minnesota did some nice budgeting for some of their watersheds statewide and found, essentially a breakdown of like 42% of that load coming from winter road salt, and 22, the remainder is kind of split between water softening systems and fertilizers. They actually have some community-based softening systems that are being put in place at their water treatment distribution systems in order to encourage people to move away from home systems that are not as easily calibrated and put them on to centralized softening systems. So kind of a unique practice, but also on this slide, just looking a little bit at the non-point source trends. Nitrogen has been trending higher rather than lower. This is again another kind of escapee of the Clean Water Act. And phosphorus has been trending down slowly, but it does still exceed targets for water quality in many parts of the Driftless. And then the other one I touched on, but stream macroinvertebrates have been seeing declines. And I think probably many of you have seen Mike Miller present. You will see him present again, hopefully, at this year's Driftless Symposium on the topic of stream macroinvertebrates and what potential causes are out there. The other kind of big category that I've brought in for our discussion for stressors in the Driftless is just barriers to passage. And this is something, maybe unsurprising given my past work in dam removal, but I've long had an eye on the kind of longitudinal connectivity of stream systems and river systems. So this is really important factor in overall population health. So one of the things that has been lagging behind in this region compared to especially the coastal regions of the country where this type of inventory work's been going on for almost 20 years, is looking at road stream crossings in the Driftless area. And that's not because our species don't move or need to have interconnected waterways, but just because coastal species have typically kind of dominated the funding and the discussions on the topic. So this is pretty straightforward work, but identifying crossings that may be serving as barriers for aquatic organisms, but also that are having impacts to stream geomorphology and sediment and debris continuity through the landscape, floodplain connectivity, and then the potential for road impacts if streams are cutting a new channel through the road or submerging it during a flood. So again, I guess this is a graphic that's kind of depicting where we're at relative to Great Lakes Basin watersheds. You'll see kind of Chris Collier's area of the state has had good inventory work underway for a number of years. This is a dashboard that's housed with the state of Michigan for the entire upper Midwest. And so everyone's data goes into this database. It'll ultimately be part of a national database on aquatic connectivity and can provide then communities like a passability score for their crossings, as well as several other metrics that can feed into planning and budgeting processes at the local level for infrastructure management. And this is actually an older estimate that was done probably around 2010, trying to estimate the number of barriers in southwestern Wisconsin driftless area. And this is very much an underestimate, but it's just sort of a stunning graphic of how much potential there is for continuity disruptions from road stream crossings in the driftless area. So the information that comes from these inventories is, not only helpful for infrastructure planning, but also is really important to planning population overall security. So many of you have probably seen some of these maps from Trout Unlimited, from other conservation groups that have assessed fish passage and fish community habitat continuity. This is from the Eastern Brook Trout Joint Venture regional maps. Oops. Here we go. Looking at places where trout populations are intact and are also of sufficient size and habitat connectivity that they are not likely to be easily lost due to a potential flood event or pollution event that could wipe out a population locally. So those are some of the things kind of top of mind as we're managing the Driftless area, but those roll into our day-to-day work in a number of different ways. And I wanted to kind of put in front of all of you some of the priority work that has been on the plates of Paul and myself. So one effort that I know you will all be familiar with on some level is our Driftless Area Restoration Effort National Fish Habitat Partnership. So the Driftless program of Trout Unlimited covers the entire 4-state area and includes all of the program work associated with cold water conservation. One piece of that work is our National Fish Habitat Partnership, which has been historically carried out as essentially a co-led effort between Fish and Wildlife Service and Trout Unlimited. So Jeff Hastings and Louise Malden, many of you may have met and know Louise, co-led this program for the last 15 or so years. And the program goals are broader than just cold water. They do actually extend to warm water species, but the focus are native species and species of greatest conservation need across the Driftless. And goals are really tied to, as we've kind of already touched on, reducing sediment and nutrient inputs in streams and increasing the resilience of aquatic resources throughout the entire Driftless region. But there's also some recreational and educational goals tied with this program. And we do, see if this will work. Yeah. We are currently actually accepting applications for our 2024 funding for that program. Those are available through me if folks are interested in getting the application materials. They're due about a month from now already. And this is for up to $50,000 grants toward planning or implementation. Does include some monitoring and some research funding, which is unique to this program, not commonly found in a lot of other grant opportunities. So you can reach out to me if you have more questions about that, but essentially this program is shifting to more administration being done by Trout Unlimited, which means that we are carrying a little bit more organizational development around the steering committee, grant administration, web presence, strategic planning, communications. And so our next big milestone obviously is this upcoming grant round, but we have a number of tasks associated with delivering this program that are in front of us as far as workload. Oh, good grief. Here we go. The other major program that we deliver in this region is our NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And I'm pleased to share with you all, we received notice recently that we will be receiving a third round of this funding. So if you will recall, several of you probably received outreach from me before you had even hardly had an introduction that we were looking to provide match contributions for this funding opportunity in order to leverage the federal dollars to bring in this restoration program. So that award has been made. The funding will probably not be on the ground until next fall, but this would be for another 5 years of funding, total of $9.2 million over 5 years. It roughly breaks down into somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 per year per state for the next 5 years. So this is a really important program that was kicked off by Jeff, now in its 3rd year, and I have to give thanks to Jeff for helping me get oriented very quickly to that program in order to put us in a position to renew it very early on in my tenure. So this program is essentially a dedicated pot of EQIP funding through the NRCS program. Many of you may not work day to day with the program, but I put a slide in here essentially for reference that identifies some of the practices that farmers can use. And so the funding through this program does have to go to something that meets these eligible land uses in the riparian area. So it needs to be in crop or pasture or forest or some kind of an associated ag use. But if that is the case, which is across much of the Driftless, landowners can apply for cost share funding to conduct these practices over here, including in-stream habitat improvements. And we've typically prioritized that work on class 1 and 2 trout streams with perpetual easements. Those are receiving the highest priorities under that program. And the overall category of resource concerns is actually quite broad. So the program is meant to address inadequate habitat, cover and continuity, and excessive sediment, as well as, it's not identified here, but degraded plant condition within the riparian areas. So all of those are eligible resource concerns that can be addressed through this program. And I think at the risk of having maybe a couple project ideas that don't go all the way through the process, I do get a lot of requests from people looking for information about future projects on our horizon. So here are a few watersheds that are likely to have projects moving through seeking some of that NRCS funding. And so I've got a few watersheds identified here. I'll let you all read those, but I think what we could maybe discuss during the Q&A, or certainly I would take emails on this or calls later, would be, determining an efficient way for there to be a communication stream between myself and Paul and all of you about potential project opportunities, sharing information with you and getting feedback back from you, and finding a way to do that where we can share information without getting ahead of projects that maybe don't go all the way through the process. So another priority, and I did reference this as a concern for our region, but also with the infrastructure funding that's out on the landscape right now, it's an opportunity for us to begin addressing that data gap that exists for the Driftless area. So we do have several irons in the fire, looking to hire crews starting next summer. We are very nearly there for funding for two-person crews to start collecting data on road stream crossings across the Driftless. This would help fill the data gap that is identified, kind of on the screen here, looking at how much a barrier may be excluding trout from viable habitat within a watershed. It also is going to put us in a position to help counties be able to queue up for infrastructure funding for key replacements. And so I wanted to include this quote from Robin Fenig at Wisconsin Emergency Management, because it really kind of encapsulates the moment that we're in related to infrastructure, that communities, over the last 10 or 12 years in the Driftless, they've experienced a ton of flooding. They've experienced a lot of infrastructure damage. The issues related to aquatic organism impacts have been there throughout. But this opportunity to bring together communities who are tired of, repetitively losing structures, and kind of breaking that cycle, creating a more resilient community, offers us also an opportunity to address aquatic organism passage, but also things like floodplain continuity, sediment, and debris continuity in these systems that'll be really helpful just to overall stream function across the Driftless. So it's a pretty exciting opportunity, and I'm really buoyed by seeing groups like emergency management kind of front and center on this issue too. Another thing that we're working on related to the water quality stressors I identified is we still retain this WISE H2O monitoring application. Probably many of you were exposed to it by Kent Johnson or Dan DeWalter at the last symposium last year. But this has been a really great engagement tool for chapters and for community members to gain more knowledge about the resources in their backyard. Provides very immediate results, which is gratifying to a lot of folks who are, I think in this day and age, just are looking for information they can answer themselves. So we're hoping to continue to utilize this water quality application in conjunction with data collection that's done by agencies, but our next area of focus, we hope, would be on Halfway Creek in La Crosse County. So taking a little look at the strategies, I wanted to give folks a perspective of backcasting over the last, should be 17 years now. This is the kind of best accounting I could find for it. But it's, easily $65 million worth of funding coming into the Driftless over that time period, which is just a real testament to the partnership that was built so long ago to bring in this variety of alphabet soup programs here. Lots of federal funding here and state funding as well, but also a ton of partner match, $15 million worth, and 350 miles of stream restored in that time period. It's a pretty incredible achievement. And so what we're, looking at over the next 5 years, at least, tied to our NRCS program, we have another 30 miles of stream, another 400 acres of riparian habitat, additional sediment and phosphorus loading reductions, but also targets to bring in another $15 million worth of funding to Driftless Watersheds. And I'm also, really interested in expanding our partnership to broaden the benefits across a larger audience. We've had really great participation in the partnership. I think we have more room for growth and interest from more parties. Obviously, success is attractive, so that helps us too. And I guess at the risk of opening a big can of worms that wasn't planned for a broad discussion tonight, I did at least want to make note, since we're kind of on the doorstep of getting this out anyway, that we have been working on our priority waters drafts for presentation to Wisconsin TU more broadly. And so for the Driftless area, we've identified the entire Driftless as a priority watershed. It's been a priority landscape with this long history and has had extensive investment across the entire area, is clearly a key stronghold for brook trout, but we do intend to drill down a little bit more into some sub-watersheds that are really kind of iconic, and probably some places where we will try to focus investments to receive a little more, I guess, build a little more momentum in a few particular watersheds of the Driftless over the next 5-year period. And so some of our kind of overarching 5-year strategies are related to floodplain restoration, stream and riparian restoration, reduction of sediment and nutrient pollution, the barrier inventories and conservation portfolio planning that will, kind of help us springboard into a new strategic plan for the fish habitat partnership, and engaging new partners. I've also included here the restoration of the Kinnickinnick following the dam removals. That's now on, roughly this same time horizon. So those are all things that were identified in our draft for discussion. Something else that is still a strategy that we are working toward, although it has been a little bit slower rolling out due to some logistical and bandwidth issues, but is nutrient management and phosphorus credit work. We're still interested in that and trying to develop that program. I think the most traction exists in the Kickapoo and in Trempealeau County watersheds, and so we're going to be focusing. I think this work will primarily be occurring there in the next 5-year period. And then another place, and this is really an outgrowth of earlier work. If you've been around this partnership, there's been elements of managed grazing here for a long time. I think maybe the 2.0 version of that work has started to center around regenerative agriculture, which takes things maybe just a few more steps farther to try to incorporate aspects of permaculture or silviculture into agricultural landscapes, and really focus around protecting soil health and utilizing some of the natural functions of natural systems to, repair and regenerate natural functions on the landscape that will ultimately reduce reliance on synthetic inputs. So a good example are the prairie strips in Iowa that are being used to, both capture water, but also sediments, also doing some denitrification, and are also providing habitat for pollinators, and are also being studied for rotational grazing. So, they're looking to kind of very intentionally utilize natural landscape components for agricultural productivity. And the idea being that these would be, over the long term, more economically sustainable because they sustain the natural resource base. So that's an area I think of expanded growth and inquiry for us. We will continue to work on and hopefully be able to kind of update and republish the NonGame wildlife guide. This has been a big chunk of our work in the 4 states, and Jeff did a huge amount of work to get NRCS conservation standards written around some of these physical definitions of a wetland scrape or of a turtle hibernaculum in a format that can be funded by NRCS and installed by equipment operators. And so that's it was a big leap at the time to get those things in place, and we're still working to get full adoption of some of the practices into all 4 of the states, but also want to update the guide with some of the lessons learned and new practices that have come to light. And then I think, finally, just a piece that we collectively, I think, share a lot of passion for is engaging youth and community groups, and a lot of the work that we're doing to make sure that after all the effort of putting the projects into the ground has been undertaken, that we really make people aware of what we're doing and share the benefits of that work with a broader audience. So that's been something that has really been heavily carried out by the chapters, and very much appreciated and acknowledged by myself and our program, and the funders of all these efforts really benefit from that level of engagement. So I put one slide together, probably seems a little lame after all the pictures to have all these words up there, but I think things that chapters and members can be thinking about moving forward to help with the delivery of the Driftless area program overall is to talk about the priority watersheds within your chapter's geography and area of interest, and share why those watersheds are priorities, what work they build upon, what other conservation initiatives are underway in those watersheds. Talk about that with Paul and myself, I think there's a lot of opportunity to really build momentum around a few key watersheds, and we'd like to be able to engage the chapters in that, since these are, this is your own backyard, and the areas very well. Another thing I've been hearing really repeatedly is just maybe this has always been the case and always will be the case, but I think the extent to which we can improve relationships with just conventional anglers and other sportsmen and women really helps build a broader coalition. We've had, tremendous success in Buffalo and Trempealeau counties, for instance, with their sportsmen's clubs. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for building that work. We've had strong relationships with Pheasants Forever. So I think just more and intentional efforts with groups of that across that whole demographic is beneficial for our programs. Another thing that I'm still trying to find the best way for collecting this information is getting feedback from you all on streams that you're actually fishing and knowledge that you have of watersheds. I've been asked by several partners, oh, well, do your members fish this watershed? And it's actually not as easy to answer as you might think it is. We maybe have an idea of who fishes, and obviously the very holy grail streams everyone knows, but then there are all of these other streams that are great for fishing, or maybe are secrets maybe folks don't want to share. But I think communities do want to know whether their streams are also, valuable for anglers. That doesn't necessarily mean that they want to send a ton of anglers out there, but they want to understand who does use them and when and how popular are they. So something I'd be interested in gathering more feedback on. Obviously, the continued support through monitoring or in-kind efforts and financial efforts toward on-the-ground projects, that's been a huge component of success across the region to help landowners cover their share of costs. And then finally, on the theme of engagement, really just keep up the great work with chapters, with youth and veterans. I think those have been really powerful programs, and speak to the passion of the Trout Unlimited chapters that are working in the Driftless and beyond. So I guess that was, Mike, where I wanted to leave us to offer some time for questions. So do you want me to leave this up here or shut it off?
You could probably turn it off if we needed to. Actually, real quick, do you mind going back a couple of slides?
Not at all.
Somebody asked about the quote from the lady from WEM. I just wonder if you could just pull up the slide quick. That might be
there it is.
Easiest. There we go. And her name was, it's down the bottom. Yeah, Robin.
Robin Fennick. Yep.
Okay, perfect. And does she have a title at WEM? Do you know what?
She does, but it's a new one now.
Okay.
So I don't know it off the top of my head. She moved up the chain, so it's probably less glamorous, more administrative type.
Sure.
Sounding.
That's okay. Somebody had mentioned, was just curious about that particular slide. Okay. So I think we've answered their question. I see that there was a question about Paul Cron, whether he was able to do permits. And I see Paul responded, yes, he is able to do that. I was just wondering, I think Paul is on tonight. I don't know if we want to give Paul an opportunity to maybe just speak to that for a minute. If we do have folks from other chapters who are doing, conservation, stream habitat restoration work in the area, if they need help with permitting. I don't know, Paul, if you're available, or yep. Sarah, maybe if you want to just speak to the options that are there that you could provide to chapters.
I'd actually love to let Paul have a chance to talk if his audio is working.
Yeah, can you hear me at all?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Yes, I can help fill out the forms and get those submitted. I think probably the biggest issue we've run across in like La Crosse and Vernon counties is some of those permits, depending on where the projects are, may require a no-rise certificate or possibly a hydraulic and hydrology study, which is has become a major issue. In fact, I even got a call today from the two guys on the DNR construction crew, Craig and Todd, that they were having issues trying to get projects going because they were running into issues at the local level getting the permits, because where they wanted to do the projects were resulted in them needing a no-rise certificate or an H&H study. But yeah, to answer the question, yes, I can help chapters with projects fill out permits and get those submitted.
All right, thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. I did not see any other questions in the chat. If somebody's got one, please bring it up. I did want to mention one thing, Sarah. You mentioned the Driftless Symposium, and I was wondering, I don't know how much of that has been set, but could you maybe just take a minute, and for folks who don't know what that is, could you maybe explain to them what that is and what you have lined up so far for this year?
Yeah, and actually, thank you, because I meant to put a slide in here. I just got my Wisconsin Trout today, and it's supposed to be in there, but I haven't had a chance to actually read it yet. So the dates are set for March 7th and 8th. And the plan was to actually run it really similar to last year, where it's a virtual event. Last year it was hosted on Facebook Live. This year we're hoping to use more of a Zoom or some other platform that'll allow us to put the content onto YouTube. In the end, we found, it's not as much fun as having it in person, but we found a huge, it really reduced a barrier to entry for people to come and get the content, because it was available for free and it was available after the fact as well. So, we had over 4,000 viewers of the videos after the fact. So I guess we're saving the climate, we're saving the driving, and we're planning to do it online. We have probably about 10 speakers lined up. I'm soliciting a couple more. The plan would be to do just morning sessions on the 7th and 8th, which I think is how it was run last year as well, two different mornings. So yeah, that is the plan for this year. And yeah, hopefully folks we're looking to get a save the date out probably later this week or early next week, in addition to what is hopefully in the Wisconsin Trout when I get that open. And we'll put it on our Facebook page as well. So
great. Yeah, that sounds, I'm sure there'll be some interesting talks that folks who regularly tune into this program, I'm sure would find interesting. So Ken had an interesting point here in a question. He says climate change poses an urgent need to maximize resiliency benefits in all projects funded. Is this consideration built into proposals as a major goal? Is that something you could speak to a little bit, Sarah?
Yeah, Ken's right on. Obviously climate change is kind of infused in all of our work. Between the brook trout temperature modeling work that's been done, that's been kind of circulating around the entire brook trout region, and the hydrologic impacts that are already being felt. It's definitely something that's baked into a lot of our project work, and into the adaptations going forward. I think we'll have some design changes and some project types that will probably expand beyond what's traditionally been done, trying to really maximize the amount of benefits that we can get out of the on the ground work that we're getting done. I think as to what's in the proposals, obviously you still have to have some things that you can demonstrate success on in the near term. So there's, we have the projection that things will be more resilient over the climate change timeline. but we can't monitor that for another 30 years probably. So
Right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good to know. Mark had a good question. I want to get to this before we run out of time. He heard you talking about the Wise H2O app, and he just went and downloaded it, tonight
Yay.
as you were speaking. And he was wondering, what's the next step? Like, what does he do with it? Like,
Yep.
could you take a minute and maybe walk us through that process if that's something that, folks online are interested in getting involved in? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So you download the app. Once you are, okay, so a couple of things. I guess we do have a video that's probably a better orientation than I can do in just a couple minutes. That is from last year's symposium. Maybe you also have one on talking trout. Did you have a presentation as well?
I don't know if we've done that yet, but I'm going to
Okay.
put that in my notes because I think we should.
Okay. But there are test strips available that either can be ordered through Mobile H2O or that are out with the chapters. I have a small supply of them here that I've actually been kind of tearing through myself and have another order planned. So I don't have a good status on who in the Crawford County area has strips immediately in hand to get to you, Mark, but you utilize a test strip and it's really quick. I guess a really quick turnaround time. Once you have the strips on the calibration card in hand, you can start monitoring immediately. And we've typically, yeah, I think there isn't really any other registration process. I think once it's downloaded, you can immediately start monitoring. I can't remember having had to do any other registration. So,
Okay.
Yep.
Is that something that you just, wherever you happen to be out in the water that day, just pop it in and do a test? Or is this something that, would it be helpful where I know there's other programs like the Wisconsin or the Water Action Volunteer Network where you go out like once a month to a particular spot on a stream and like monitor water quality. Would it be helpful if folks were doing things like that, like the same spot, the same stream, like month after month? Or is this just, hey, I'm out fishing this water, I'm curious to know what the water quality is like?
Yeah, I know Kent could probably speak to this even better than I could. There's benefits in both approaches, right? So it's great for people to be using it because it does have that immediacy to be able to use it on the day that you're fishing. Absolutely. It's a very low cost and quick turnaround way to get information on the water that you're currently standing in. But it is also great to be able to have a little bit more of a structured regimen of collecting samples. And I know that Kent and the Kayaptuish, and I think also the TCTU, the Twin Cities chapters, have done a number of set up regular monitoring sites that they're using the test strips for, as well as taking some traditional water samples at some regular intervals to help validate those results.
Yeah, I would suggest, if you're out there, if you're active in your local chapter, I would suggest going to your local chapter leaders and talking up this program, this app. Citizen science is certainly something that TU wants to focus more on in the future. And I really think it's got to happen at the chapter level, just because the local streams the best. Like, these are the streams that are in our backyards. If you can get the chapter to buy in and kind of organize a little group of you who are going to go out and do this, maybe the chapter can provide the test strips, and you go out once a month or once every 2 weeks or whatever it may be, and check the water quality. And if you got a habitat restoration project coming up, check it for a year prior, and then check it for a year after, and see if there's any changes. Maybe nothing changes, maybe a lot of things change. That information would be certainly good to know.
Yeah, this is,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. This is Kent Johnson.
Hey, Ken.
Mike and Sarah provided a great summary of the app. It's a great screening tool for use out in the water, wherever you happen to be and for whatever reason. You can take a general approach to using it at your convenience, or you can set up a chapter monitoring plan or test consistently at the same location. And all of that is good information. It's a crowdsourcing way to collect water chemistry data that just doesn't exist right now. And we're primarily looking at parameters like pH, hardness, alkalinity, 2 forms of nitrogen, soluble phosphorus. You can record water temperatures. You can record observations on habitat condition, and the data is automatically uploaded to a cloud database when you are in cellular service range. And if you're in an area where you aren't and don't have cell service, you can still make the observation. And as you move away from that location into cell service, the data are automatically uploaded to the cloud. They're immediately reviewable on your phone, so you get instant feedback. There's a lot of information on the program on the Mobile H2O website. There's a specific project related to the Driftless area. We have protocols, detailed protocols available on the Mobile H2O website too, both in written form and in video instruction. And like Sarah mentioned, the kits are available for purchase on the website as well. They're pretty inexpensive. Initially, we distributed kits to all of the Driftless area chapters when we had funding available to do that. So it's a great tool for screening water quality conditions across the Driftless. 2022 marked the 3rd year of monitoring within the Driftless area. So we're really excited about the project.
Thanks, Kent. I
Yep.
will touch base with you offline about possibly doing a future presentation here on Talking Trout. I think there's a fair amount of interest in that. Before you go, real quick, Tom Lager was wondering, is the data that everybody collects, you mentioned this kind of a crowdsourcing thing, is all that data available to folks?
It is. Right now, we're working out a process. The database is proprietary with Mobile H2O, so it's a little clumsy, and the consideration that data requests all funnel through Mobile H2O, and I'm working with Carter Borden at Mobile H2O and Dan Dewalter on coming up with a process that would streamline that and get data quickly and efficiently back to individual users or groups, like any of the chapters that have conducted monitoring.
Sure. That sounds great. I see Sarah put a link in the chat box. If anybody's interested, you can find out more about that program. Just click that link for sure. And then, like I said, I've got it in my notes. We'll try to do a future program on that. I think that'd be pretty interesting. Sarah, can we hit a couple of other questions real super quick?
Sure.
Okay. I know we're past 9 o'clock, so I'm going to try to wrap this up quick. But David asked if anybody was planning any like large scale tree plantings in the Wisconsin streams. Do you know of any tree planting days coming up? I know like Michigan does a lot of this stuff, especially with the communities and the kids, and I'm not as aware of as much of it happening in Wisconsin yet, but I'd be curious if anything's on your radar.
Wisconsin last year did a 4th grade tree planting thing through DNR's forestry, and I think it was their first year really trying to expand out that program. I don't know if they're still going to plan for that this year, so I'm not sure on the 4th grade thing, but we are encouraging chapters and folks who have been reaching out to DARE that tree planting could be one of I guess one of the measures that folks are using for community engagement beyond monitoring. I think traditionally chapters have done a lot of work with styles and fencing and signage. Tree planting is another complementary effort to those types of endeavors, and doesn't require folks to have the construction equipment either, so it's a little more community friendly.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I first got into Trout Unlimited maybe 15, 20 years ago, a lot of the work days, I mean, we were building lunker structures. We'd get together, 6 times a year and build lunkers, and things have kind of evolved, and those opportunities are, there are places for lunkers, but we're finding out there's a lot more you can do with habitat outside of that. And it's good for the evolution of stream restoration, but I think it's left a gap in our TU volunteer opportunities, and so finding these other opportunities like tree plantings or building styles or just getting folks active in their local watersheds, the things that we can do like that are all good things. So, and then
Yeah.
David had one more question I thought would be good to touch on, and that, I don't know, there's a lot of emerging information about PFAS, but he was asking if we had any specific policy on streams and rivers and lakes affected with PFAS. I know from the state council's point of view, I don't think we've taken a formal position on it, but I know when they found instances of it, we tried to do some education about consumptive angling practices, where hey, if you're gonna keep fish, make sure you're aware that they've found PFAS in these rivers and things like that. But does TU National have a policy yet?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I am glad to hear about your efforts to educate folks on the consumption advice, because I think that's, in my time at DNR, it was something that I found there isn't always a lot of community knowledge about, those consumptive use guidelines, where to find them and how to read them, and whether they're, I think people just, whether they're relevant to them. So having an introduction to them, or a reminder that they're there and they're useful, and that they do cover more compounds than just the historic compounds, is a really useful niche for Trout Unlimited as a recreational group too.
And I do know if folks are interested in following along with the PFAS thing, I think the DNR has put together a really good website that's got location specifics on where pretty much all the data that, at least to my knowledge, that they have, a lot of the data is available publicly on this website. So you could probably do a quick Google search and come up with that pretty quickly. But there's some good information out there, and obviously that's something where there's still a lot of information that's yet to come, because we're just starting to scratch the surface on what this all means for us. With that, I think Jason mentioned that his chapter was planning. I know Jason's part of the Cooley region chapter, kind of based out of, I guess, the La Crosse, Viroqua area there, and he said they had a plan to do some tree plantings this spring, so that's pretty cool to see. And then I see Brent, thanks for just dropping the link in the chat if anybody's interested in that, in the PFAS website. I believe Brent just dropped the link there in the chat. So with that, I think, Sara, I just want to thank you again for coming on and sharing what you've been up to. I know, for a lot of folks, when we first heard like Jeff Hastings was retiring, it's like, oh my goodness, what are we gonna do? Like the sky is gonna fall. Like, Jeff's the only person who's ever been in charge of the Driftless area restoration program, or the restoration effort. Like, how is this going to continue? And I'm really happy that the folks at Trout Unlimited found you and brought you on board, because I think the future of this program is in very good hands, and I'm really excited to see where you and Paul and all of the other partners and all the local chapters and everybody that buys into this region and this area. I'm really excited to see where we take restoration in the next 10, 15, 20 years. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Mike. I really appreciate it.
You bet. All right, everybody, have a good night. I'll give a quick shout out. The first Wednesday in February, we're going to have Kyle Zempel from Black Earth Angling Company on as a guest on Talking Trout. So make sure you put that one in your calendar. And then I should also give a shout out. Our state council banquet is coming up Saturday, February 4th. We're going to be in Oshkosh in person again. Really looking forward to getting together with a lot of you and celebrating some folks who've done some really good work. We're going to recognize them with some awards that night. And really it's just going to be about getting together and having a good time and celebrating the successes that we see as we do restoration work around the state. So I hope a lot of you can make that as well. So thanks again, and we will talk to you soon.